Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Welcome back to the Living Out podcast and to our series where we are answering your questions. We've got a whole series worth of questions that you have asked us, all about things like parenting and church, experiencing same-sex attraction, evangelism, and today we're very excited to be answering your questions about friendship. We've just done a whole series on friendship, but we've got some great questions all about it, so we wanted to have this bonus episode almost about it. Joining me to answer those questions today, I've got Ed, who, if you are a regular listener, you will recognise his voice. I'm Ashleigh, I should say that as well. And then we're also joined by Dan. Dan is another member of the Living Out team. He edits our podcast, but we've dragged him round to the other side of the microphone today. Dan also experiences same-sex attraction and has some wonderful insights on friendship, so we wanted to get his input in this episode. Hello, Dan. Hello, Ed.
Hello, hello.
Good to be with you.
Hello, hello. Lovely to see you both. So we're going to start off with another question that's been submitted by one of our listeners, but a sort of more light-hearted question before we get into the meaty stuff. Although for some people, this is going to be a very serious question. If you could only listen to one song on repeat for the rest of your life, what song would it be and why? Dan?
Well, apart from the Living Out podcast jingle, which was, of course, my first thought, I'm going to be very pretentious and choose a classical piece, which I'm enjoying at the moment, which is by a guy called Max Richter, who's recomposed for Vivaldi's Four Seasons. And there's a piece called Spring 1, 2012, which I was listening to recently while enjoying some late evening sunshine and just the glory of long summer days, and almost shed tears of joy to it. So I could listen to that on repeat forever at the moment.
Wow, what a highbrow opening to this episode. Thank you, Dan. It's higher than our usual tone. Ed, you going to bring the tone down?
Well, no, not really, because I am also as pretentious as Dan, or going to be. So I went to immediately. I mean, this is a brilliant question. I love these questions. Basically, it turns out I think all our sort of starter questions should be done by listeners from now on because they're much better than the ones we've ever invented. But I went to my Desert Island Discs playlist on Spotify and then sat there paralysed as to which of those it would be. But one of the reasons was it's just this whole thing about on loop for the rest of your life, because it could be Healy Hutchinson Carol Symphony, which coincidentally is the theme tune to the Box of Delights, or it could have been Supertramp, Fool's Overture, which are there on the Desert Island Disc. But on loop for the rest of my life, that's what really got me. So I'm going to go for Bach Mass in B minor, because that is a big, big, big piece, which I think I could cope with listening on loop for the rest of my life. I've taken this question very seriously. Thank you very much for it. It got me listening to music.
I feel like I haven't taken it seriously enough after that. I didn't think about the on repeat aspect of the question. I should have gone for like a 20-minute track. I am going to go for a Taylor Swift song. We are about 3 days out from the announcement that Taylor Swift now owns the masters for her first 6 albums. If you don't know what I'm talking about, have a look at the news and that will tell you all the things. But I'm very excited about it on her behalf and listening to some of those songs quite a lot at the moment. So I'm going to have to go for one from the album Reputation. And the song is called Don't Blame Me. And it's great. It's a lot of bass and thuddy noises. I love it. Not quite, a classical piece, but it has its own charms.
I'm going to, as soon as this episode is over, I'm going to listen to both those. I need to write them down. I'm going to listen to both those pieces out of, sort of loyalty to you both as friends.
Well, I'm sure we can put them in the show notes so everyone can have the joy of the transition between those three choices. All right, let's get into our slightly more serious questions from our listeners, all about friendship today. So our first question is, what practical actions would you recommend that one can practice in their walk with God, particularly when it comes to same-sex attraction and having close friendships with the same sex? Any boundaries to implement, things like that? Who'd like to kick us off? Ed, shall I turn to you?
Well, I guess... Yeah. Ask a good question. These are really good questions. I immediately want to sort of follow it up with a question. So if I was being asked this in person, I think it depends on your experience of same-sex attraction. Because different. I can remember when I was first sort of talking about my experience of same-sex attraction with other people who are same-sex attracted. I remember one of the biggest surprises being that people have different experiences of same-sex attraction. I thought I'd found a minority group, and finally I would find the people that lived life and felt life and experienced attraction exactly how I do. Turns out they don't. And that was sort of, for some reason, a surprise for me. And I found out that there's different patterns of attraction, and there's different things that have been difficult for different people at different times. So, I have friends who any sort of close friendship with somebody of the same sex that became sort of emotionally sort of intimate, they found really difficult because they'd find themselves falling in love with them, and their sort of sexual attractions would follow the pattern of that relational intimacy, and therefore the boundaries they had to put in place were completely different to me. So for me, and as has often been said on the Living Out podcast or at Living Out events, I'm just very shallow, like quoting Jeanette Howard on Ed Shaw, that's how she describes me. Because for me, attraction is a very physical thing, and therefore the boundary I need to put in place, or the people I would need to be aware of, are a particular type of very good-looking guy who was also same-sex attracted. That would be an alarm bell moment for me, and who might be attracted to me. If I was in a situation where I had a mutual attraction to a very certain type of very good-looking guy, there were a number of boundaries I'd have to put in place. There'd be people who look after me, that I'd want to share that sort of information with. There'll be situations I'd want to avoid being in with that person. But to be honest, the story of my life is that there has been no very good-looking guy who has been attracted to me, and therefore I have not had to worry or put any of those things in place. So in some ways, it just depends on who you are, the pattern of your attractions, as to where the boundaries need to put in place. And in some ways, the only person that can answer this question is probably you, in conversation with people who know you best, and people you can be open and honest with, and who can help you to see the scenarios where perhaps it's been difficult in the past, or the temptations there might be. So I hope it's not sort of ducking the question, but if the listeners to the question is asking, there's a bit of advice. It basically depends. You perhaps need to sit down and have a conversation with people who know you best to work out what are the boundaries that need to be placed for you, given your circumstances and the pattern of your sexual attractions.
That's really helpful, Ed. Thank you. Dan, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of Ed's wisdom there. I think really helpful to involve other people where you think there might be temptation or problems around that, and I think praying about it as well is always a good idea. I think my attractions probably follow a similar pattern to Ed, in that it's often quite a physical thing. So I found a few times, maybe there's someone new at church who I find attractive, or someone who's been around for a long time but I don't know very well, and I can feel quite intimidated by that, I guess, and then sort of will try and avoid them even if there's very little chance of there being any mutual attraction. And I found in those kind of scenarios, actually getting to know them as a person and a friend kind of breaks down some of that, I don't know, whatever you'd call it, sort of putting them on a pedestal or something, and just building a friendship with them and with their friends. I think that's been helpful for me. But yeah, I think like Ed said, it kind of depends on you and them and the situation. I'm sure it varies quite a lot, but that's what I'd recommend.
Just what Dad said is really helpful, because I think sometimes the only Christian approach to temptation is to run a mile, and in some circumstances that's exactly right. But sometimes, actually, the good response is actually go towards. In some ways. So I can remember when I was really struggling in very similar circumstances to Dan, with a good-looking guy who I really was attracted to at church, and I was so desperate. I spoke to one of my heterosexual colleagues about this and say, "What do you do in these circumstances?" And I thought their response would be, the run a mile response, and their response was, "Oh, I go and talk to them and get to know them." So that they can stop being, because they basically, this heterosexual friend explained, and it was entirely right for me, is that when you have this person you're sort of keeping away from and you're keeping a distance, they can very soon become the ideal person. They not only look brilliant, but they're the most amazing personality, and they become basically they can become the dream person, and actually that becomes more problematic than actually getting to know them and discovering that although they might have they might look really good, they're actually quite an immature or not particularly, whatever else it is. And actually that's the thing that can dissolve the attraction, actually most help you, is actually getting to know them a little bit more and understanding that they're a person and not just an object of your affection. So I think what Dan says there is really wise in a lot of circumstances, not all, because it depends on who you are, but I can remember being so helped by some counterintuitive advice I once got from a straight friend on all of this.
Mm-hmm. That really chimes with a lot of my experience as well. I mean, Ed, you already talked about how our experiences of attraction are a bit different. So for me, I tend to be attracted to somebody when I do have a little bit of relationship with them and I do know them a little bit. But even so, often pressing into relationship is the thing I find helpful. So I'm thinking of someone who I met a few years ago who was a mutual friend and kind of didn't think much of her at the start of the kind of interaction. But then was just getting to know her a little bit and we started hanging out. And then there was a point where I went, oh, I feel like I'm starting to feel attracted to you. And at that point, I could have gone, oh, I need to now try and pull back from this friendship that I've initiated. But I didn't in the end. And it was exactly as you guys have said, just getting to know her a little better and going, oh, you're not perfect. Like, she was lovely, but she was not this perfect ideal that there was in my head. And that was just really, really helpful to me. But yeah, as you've said, Ed, for some people, actually that's going to be a really unhelpful thing to do. And so much of this is just about self-awareness, knowing yourself, having people around you who know you well and can say to you, I feel like in this situation or with this person or because of who you are as a person, maybe actually moving into this relationship would be a bad call and maybe you should take a step back. But that's something that you need to figure out for yourself with God and with the people around you. I would also just want to talk a little bit about fear, because I think, and this ties into what we've been saying already, we can be so afraid of attraction, particularly same-sex attraction, of temptation, of messing up in terms of sin. Obviously, we don't want to do that. But when we are operating out of fear in life, things tend to go a bit sideways. We want to be wise, of course, but we don't want to be fearful and let fear be our motivator. So I just want to caution against that as well. So rather than kind of setting up a fearful boundary of no one is ever going to come past this point in my life, I'm never going to have any close friendships with anyone of the same sex, and kind of setting that kind of boundary out of fear, rather than doing that, let's try and be wise, of course, but not let fear be our motivator.
And it's so important for all of us to have a whole range of different friendships and not to cut ourselves off if we're same-sex attracted from friendships with people who are the same sex as us. That's, and I think that is, fear can so often stop that from happening. But yes, Christians of all people, we should not be living our lives driven by fear. We should be wise and cautious, particularly if we are finding ourselves being tempted away from Jesus and his ways. But we should not be driven by fear.
Let's jump on to question 2. So this person has asked, navigating male-female friendships, what boundaries should there be? Does this depend on whether you're married or single? So thoughts on opposite-sex friendships. Dan, I'll start with you this time.
I've been blessed with lots of really good opposite-sex friendships, and some of my deepest friendships have been with people of the opposite sex. So I think I sometimes go into them quite naively, thinking, oh, well, I'm not attracted to this person, so there's no problem here. But I've been really helped by friends who have said, oh, actually, like, I haven't had a friendship like this before, or I've been quite hurt by my relationships with men in the past, and I'm not quite comfortable with how much we're messaging each other or spending time one-on-one, and actually just having those conversations has been really helpful. Can be a bit difficult and awkward, but I think it's really helped our friendships to thrive. Just being wise about how you're spending time together, what's best for both people involved, and I think just knowing when you might need to do things differently, and I think again it kind of depends on the person and the situation, and we don't want to run away from those relationships. But I think sometimes boundaries are helpful, and I think in all cases just having good communication is really helpful, so you know where each other's at and how each other is feeling.
I think the danger, isn't it? In answer to every question, we're going to say it depends who you are and your circumstances. But I think it does, and I think if we're thinking about this question from, a same-sex attractor point of view, obviously in some ways one of the lovely things for same-sex attracted people in our friendships with people of the opposite sex is it can just feel wonderfully uncomplicated from our point of view, and that's fine. But there's a danger that we can be quite selfish. And so just to give a couple of examples from my life of when I have been, I think, selfish, there's plenty of examples, but let's just stick with a couple. I think one would be, before I was open and honest with people about my sexuality, I think I was very unhelpful in my friendships with some women, because we had a really good friendship. We had quite a deep friendship, and I was potentially giving them just a wrong idea with the friendship I was developing with them, that they were thinking would develop into a romantic relationship and a marriage. And just me not being open and honest about my same-sex attraction was harmful to me, but actually particularly harmful to them, in not sort of saying there wasn't going to be the possibility of that relationship changing into a romantic one as getting married. And I think one of the things I've had to repent of was just how because I didn't want to be open about my same-sex attraction, I allowed some people to get the wrong idea, and that was bad for them and it was bad for me. And I just it's probably worth just sort of naming that as one thing. The other thing is just, I think I can be sort of selfish sometimes I think there's got to be careful in how I put this. There's sometimes a danger of same-sex attracted people in their relationship with the opposite sex becoming the sort of the ideal version of that, without actually being up for so basically beginning to act like the sort of the perfect husband, even though you could never be that. And actually some of the things, because the complication of sex and sexual attractions out of the relationship, that making it just much more of a relaxed relationship, and then a sort of becoming somebody's quasi husband or wife without being in the position to actually be their husband or wife, I think it's just something that, it's just worth us being aware of. And I think this ties in with something that you said, Ashleigh, in answer to the previous question, is that if a friendship is becoming exclusive, any sort of friendship is becoming exclusive outside marriage, I think that's a sign that it's not healthy. All our friendships should be able to draw other people in. Marriage is exclusive. Friendship should be wonderfully inclusive. And I've just seen every so often that sometimes my friendship with somebody of the opposite sex can start to be exclusive, start to be a quasi marriage, and that is an alarm bell moment and a point of selfishness for me, of me basically wanting to get a lot of the benefits of marriage without making the commitment of marriage, and without being wanting to be united and at one with somebody in marriage.
That's interesting. Again, just different experiences. So Ed, you've said that's something you need to be aware of in your opposite sex friendships. For me, that's something I need to be more aware of in my same sex friendships. That's not something I'm going to struggle with in my opposite sex friendships, just with how they work. I think I'm just probably going to echo what you guys have both said in terms of my own experiences. So thinking of one of my male friends who we've become friends in the last year or two. We very early on in our relationship, I was very upfront with him about what I thought was going on in our relationship. So we'd had a few chats kind of in a group context. We were messaging a little bit. And then a couple of days into that, I sent him a message that essentially outlined, here's where I'm at in terms of sexuality. That's not going to change anytime soon. I'm very happy being single. That's also not going to change anytime soon. I really enjoy your company. I'm really enjoying hanging out with you. And I just want to be clear. I think this is a friendship. Are we on the same page? Because if not, we should probably have a conversation. And he then thanked me for sending that message and just really appreciated that clarity that we now had about where our relationship was. And our friendship has been so uncomplicated and so easy from that point onwards. And I really, really value it. So just, communication and ensuring that clarity, I think, is always a good way forwards. The question has asked about whether this depends on whether you're married or single. So just on that friend that I've just referred to is a single guy. I also have a close guy friend who is married, and we have very similar relationships, me and those two male friends, even though one is married and one is single. My married guy friend, I tend to hang out with him and his wife rather than hang out with him one-on-one, but that's because I really like both him and his wife rather than because he is married. And, you know, he and I, my married friend and I will, you know, share car journeys together or things like that. That's not really an issue for any of us. As we've already said, for some people, this is going to be different. It depends who you are. It depends who your friends are. Some people are going to have very different boundaries depending on whether they're married or single. And again, I think it's just communicating about that and making sure that everyone knows what is going on and is comfortable with what is going on, I think, in all relationships, but definitely in opposite-sex friendships, is a good way forwards.
We very much hope you're enjoying this Living Out podcast. If you appreciate what we do on the website, through our events and so on, and you would like to support us financially or in prayer, please do check out the details on the Living Out website. Thank you so much.
Right then, next question. In the context of a Christian family, how do you best love a sibling who is in a same-sex relationship? Ed.
I think one of the most helpful things we can do in this one is just imagine what it's like to be them in a Christian family. So I don't know, again, exactly the circumstances behind this question, but let's say there's a Christian family, Christian siblings, but one of the siblings isn't a Christian and is in a same-sex relationship. And that is a big issue in the family because everybody believes that sex is for marriage. And there was, you know, this has been a shock and a surprise and people are horrified. Let's say that's the context. I think in some ways, whatever the context is, you want to imagine what would it be like to be this person? What fears, questions have they got in the family context? They're your sibling. You know them well. You know how they function as a member of your family. You know the history of your relationship. Try and imagine yourself into their shoes. And think, what would they be thinking and feeling? What ways might they be doubting the rest of the family's love for them? What fears will they have about whether they and their same-sex partner will be welcomed at family events? Just basically try and put yourself in their shoes and then think what you can do that will most communicate your love for them. And, you know, we all give and receive love in different ways. Listeners will be probably aware of love languages and we'll know our siblings' love languages and we'll know perhaps in these sort of circumstances what their fears and questions are going to be. How can you make your sibling and their partner feel loved and valued and listened to and cared for? And basically I just spend a lot of time thinking about that, praying about that, and then basically do all you can to communicate that you love them. Because they're your sister, because they're your brother, because they're part of your family, and that you are interested in them and their relationship, even if you might not think it's right, but you still love them because that's what true love looks like.
I think that's all incredibly important. I think another part of that is listening really, really well. So often when we are having conversations with people, we're not really listening to them. We're just waiting for them to stop talking so we can say what we think. Or we're not listening in order to understand somebody else's viewpoint. We're listening so that we can refute their argument and show them why we're right. But what we really need to do is genuinely listen to people and go, I'm not here to try and prove you wrong. I'm not here to try and make my case. I'm here just because I want to understand you better. So I'm going to ask you questions. They're going to be really genuine questions, really curious questions. I'm going to take time to listen to you. I'm maybe not going to respond straight away, just going to take some time and think and digest what it is you've said to me. All those kind of things I think are really, really helpful as well, just listening really well.
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's not a situation I've been in myself, but I think finding ways to communicate that you love them, and from stories that I've read, I think showing an interest in their partner and the relationship, and again, asking genuine questions about that and getting to know them, I think that probably goes a long way in showing Christ's love, which I guess is what we're aiming to do in all of that.
And I think just be aware that Christians, we often have a real temptation, or fall into temptation of doing Christian virtue signalling, which is feeling that the thing that we need to do is download what we think of their relationship, why we think it's wrong. A small little lecture on our sort of theology of sex and sexuality to show that we're a proper Christian. And in most family contexts, they know what you think. They know what you believe. That's not the first thing you need to do. Is to download a sort of little lecture on the subject. It is to love and to listen.
Yeah. When I first read this question, I wondered if it was about a biological family, and that's kind of how we've been answering it. But then I did also wonder if this person asking the question was referring more to church family. So just to repeat the question, in the context of a Christian family, how do you best love a sibling who is in a same-sex relationship? And so I was thinking, maybe this is someone who has changed their theology in your church, or someone that you didn't realise held a different theology to you until they got into this relationship. So just in case that's where the question is coming from, just a couple thoughts on that. I'd want to think about how would you love them if they were not in a same-sex relationship, and largely I would act the same. Kind of everything we've already said about advice for a biological sibling, I think applies to a spiritual sibling as well. I think in some cases you might want to talk about it. You might want to maybe just clear the air. Again, listen really well to them. But there are other cases where those conversations are actually going to be really difficult to have. You might not feel able to, you might not want to, it might be too painful. And it wouldn't be right actually to try and push having a conversation about this theological shift that may or may not have happened. And again, as we keep saying, it's going to depend on your situation and your relationship with this person and who they are and all that sort of thing. I do also want to say that whatever this situation is, something like this is likely to strain or to change your relationship with this person. And that is really, really difficult. And we need to acknowledge that, maybe with them, again, depending on exact situations, but definitely to acknowledge that pain with God and with your other friends. And give yourself the space to grieve the things in that relationship that are changing or that you feel like you're losing. That is important for us to do just for our own emotional health, actually taking the time to acknowledge that pain and to grieve it with God.
And just sort of, if this is a nuclear family context that this question's coming behind, my number one recommendation book-wise, and I've done a review of this on the Living Out website, is the book that's been written beautifully by Brad and Drew Harper called Space at the Table. And it's a Christian dad and his son who's been in same-sex relationships, isn't a Christian. And it's both of them talking about their nature of their relationship, what's changed, what they've both done that's been wrong and unhelpful. It's just raw and honest and beautiful. It's one of those books I read just in one sitting and wept a lot, but it's beautiful and well worth the read if you haven't already.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Hopefully got time for one more question, which is, how do you keep a healthy relationship with non-Christian same-sex attractive friends, especially ones you used to have a sexual relationship with? Dan, you got to kick us off for this one?
Yeah, I think in my experience, sometimes it's just not really possible. It can be really hard. I've not had a long-term relationship, but there's been people I've been with who have kept in touch in some form, or who have perhaps continued following each other on social media and things. And I think, in some cases, every time they've been in touch, it's just been them trying to convince me to hook up with them again, which I'm trying to say I'm not interested in. And I think you can try and be gracious about that and politely tell them no and explain why as much as you can. But sometimes I think after a while you just can't keep on going like that, and maybe you just have to set some kind of boundary. So that can be really hard, and I have to repent of the pain and hurt I've caused in those relationships. But after a while, there isn't always much you can do to keep them going. But in other cases, I think it can be a bit weird that you're still in touch or that they're still following you on social media, even though you, like in my case, I've shared stuff from Living Out that I've done, and that doesn't seem to have repelled them. So, I guess I can pray that somehow God will use that and, use the mess of it all to somehow draw them to himself. So I think it can be tricky and messy, and sometimes it's not really possible, but if there is a way to be in touch and to have some sort of contact with them which isn't leading you into temptation, and that maybe gives you opportunities to share about your faith and why you're making different decisions now, then great. But again, I think it really varies depending on the situation.
I think there's a really wise balance, Dan, in what you've just expressed, where you are valuing relationship and you're valuing this other human being, but you're also acknowledging sometimes it's not possible to stay in relationship with somebody, and finding the balance of that can be quite tricky. We live in a culture where we throw relationships away far too quickly and far too easily, and that's why I love the balance in what you've just said, that actually, if we can, we want to maintain relationship with people. But there are situations where sometimes that just isn't possible, either could be for a whole number of reasons. And we do, as we keep saying through this episode, we do need to be aware of ourselves. We need to talk with wise friends. We need to talk with the Lord and figure out what's actually best in this situation, what's going to be best for my walk with Jesus, but also for them. And how can we proceed? Great. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Dan, both for your wisdom. Hopefully the people listening have found that helpful. All the resources we've mentioned, including the songs we'd listened to on repeat for eternity, are in the show notes, so do check those out. Thank you for listening, and come back next episode where we're going to take a brief break from answering your questions and have a special episode all about polyamory and consensual non-monogamy. So if you don't know what that is, or you have questions about it, or you're thinking, why should I care? Come back next episode to find out more. Bye for now.